Imagine a quiet boy sitting alone in a cold room in Finland. Outside, the snow is falling. The city is dark and silent. But inside that room, a small screen glows. The boy is typing. He has been typing for hours. His fingers move fast. His eyes are locked on the screen. He is not playing a game. He is not watching a video. He is building something. Something that most people cannot even imagine. Something that will one day change the entire world. That boy is Linus Torvalds, and this is his story. Most people have never heard his name, but almost every person on earth uses something he created. When you search the internet, you use his work. When you watch a video online, you use his work. When a doctor checks your health records on a computer, he uses his work. When a rocket goes into space, it runs on his work. When a scientist studies the stars, the supercomputer doing the calculations probably runs on his work. When millions of people around the world send messages, shop online, stream music, or pay their bills, the systems behind all of that are almost certainly powered by something Linus built, alone, in that cold room in Finland, when he was only 21 years old. This is the story of a shy boy who became one of the greatest minds in the history of technology. This is a story about loneliness, hard work, failure, and the power of one simple idea. This is a story about how one person, with no money and no team, changed the world forever. Let us go back to the beginning. Linus Benedict Torvalds was born on December 28, 1969, in Helsinki, Finland. Helsinki is the capital of Finland. It is a beautiful city by the sea, but in winter it is very cold and very dark. The sun barely rises, the days are short, the nights are long. People spend a lot of time inside their homes. Linus was born into a family that loved learning. His father, Nils Torvalds, was a journalist. His mother, Anna Torvalds, was also a journalist. They were smart people. They loved words and ideas. They valued education and thinking. Linus also had a sister. Her name was Sarah. Their family was small but close. But it was his grandfather who changed the direction of Linus's life forever. His grandfather's name was Leo Torvalds. Leo was a professor of statistics. He was a man who loved numbers and mathematics deeply. He spent his life working with data, patterns, and logic, and he had something very special in his home. He had a computer. This was extremely unusual in the 1970s and early 1980s. At that time, most people did not have computers. Computers were large, expensive machines that only universities and big companies could afford. But Leo had a small home computer. The computer was called a Commodore VIC-20. It was a small personal computer. By today's standards, it was incredibly limited. It had very little memory. It could not do very much. The graphics were simple. The sounds were basic. But for a young boy named Linus, it was like a window into another world. A world of infinite possibility. Linus first saw this computer when he was very young, around 10 or 11 years old. Leo showed him how it worked. He gave Linus books about programming. He sat with him and encouraged him to experiment. He let Linus make mistakes on the computer without getting angry. He was patient. He was enthusiastic. He believed in the boy, and Linus loved it. He absolutely, completely, passionately loved it. From that first moment in his grandfather's home, computers became Linus's world. But let us also understand who Linus was as a person. He was not a loud boy. He was not popular at school. He was quiet. He was shy. He did not have many friends. He was the kind of child that other children sometimes found hard to understand. He was more interested in computers and mathematics than in sports or parties or the things most children talked about. He spent a lot of time alone. He felt more comfortable with machines than with people. This might sound sad, and in some ways it was difficult. Linus was lonely sometimes. He wanted to connect with people, but he did not always know how. Human relationships felt complicated and confusing to him. Computers, on the other hand, were logical. They behaved exactly as you told them to. They did not have bad moods. They did not play tricks. They responded to what you gave them. And Linus found comfort in that predictability. But this quietness, this time alone, this tendency towards solitude, these were also the things that made him extraordinary. Because when you spend a lot of time alone, you can think deeply. You can focus on one problem for a very long time. You can follow an idea all the way to its end without being distracted. And that is exactly what Linus did. Every single day of his childhood, he focused, he learned, he went deeper, he spent his teenage years teaching himself everything about computers. He read every book he could find on programming and mathematics. He practiced writing code every day. He typed long lines of instructions late into the night. His family would go to sleep, and Linus would still be awake, sitting in the glow of the screen, working, learning, experimenting, failing, trying again. He was not doing this for school. He was not doing this to impress anyone. He was doing it because it was the most interesting thing in the world to him. Because every time he solved a small problem, a new and more interesting problem appeared. And that chain of problems and solutions felt like the most exciting game imaginable. His grandfather Leo also continued to play a critical role. Leo would give Linus mathematical challenges, real problems, hard problems, problems that required genuine thinking. Leo believed that a sharp mind was like a muscle. If you wanted it to be strong, you had to use it hard. And Linus trained his mind hard every day. They would sit together, the old professor and the young boy, working through problems on paper. The room would be quiet except for the scratch of pencil and the occasional question. How would you approach this? Leo would ask, Linus would think, sometimes for a long time, and then he would speak his answer slowly, carefully, explaining his reasoning steps by step. Yes, Leo would say, nodding. Yes, that is good. But what if you tried this way? And they would explore together. Those hours with his grandfather were among the most precious of Linus's young life. They shaped the way he thought. They gave him a love of precision and logic. They taught him that the right answer was worth working hard for. But when Linus was around 12 years old, Leo passed away. It was a profound loss. Linus was heartbroken. His grandfather had been one of the most important people in his life. Leo had seen something special in the boy, something that others had missed or ignored. He had given Linus time and attention and encouragement. He had sparked a fire that would eventually warm the entire digital world. After Leo was gone, Linus felt that gap deeply. He missed the conversations, he missed the challenge, he missed the feeling of being truly seen and understood. But he carried Leo's lessons inside him. He kept working, he kept learning, he kept coding. It was his way of honoring the man who had believed in him first. By the time Linus was a teenager, he was already far beyond most adults in his understanding of computers and programming. He was reading technical books that university students struggled with. He was solving problems that most adults had never even thought about. He had developed an intuition for how computers worked, an almost physical sense of the logic underneath the surface. When Linus was in high school, he saved up and bought his own computer. It was called a Sinclair QL. It was a small personal computer that was supposed to be for business use. In practice, it had many problems. It was unreliable. The software was full of bugs. By normal standards, it was frustrating. But Linus did not think in normal standards. He saw the problems as invitations. He opened the software and started fixing it himself. He rewrote parts of it. He made it more stable. He made it work the way he wanted it to work. He was already doing what he would spend his whole life doing, taking imperfect things and making them better. He was not just a user of computers, he was a creator. Even then, after high school, Linus enrolled at the University of Helsinki. He studied computer science. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by people who spoke his language, people who found the same things fascinating, people who spent their evenings talking about algorithms and operating systems and the beauty of efficient code. It was not that he suddenly became social. He was still quiet, still reserved. But at least the environment felt right. He felt less like an outsider. At university, Linus encountered something that would change the entire direction of his life. He came across a book called Operating Systems, Design and Implementation. It was written by a professor named Andrew Tannenbaum. It was a detailed technical book about how operating systems work. Inside the book, Tannenbaum described a small operating system he had created for teaching purposes. He called it NMINX. An operating system is the most fundamental software on a computer. It is the layer that sits between the hardware and everything else. It controls the memory, the processor, the input and output devices. Without an operating system, you cannot run any programs. Without it, the computer is just metal and plastic. The operating system is what gives the machine its mind. Minix was designed to help students understand operating systems. It was educational. It was small. It was well documented. Linus studied it intensely. He read it. He ran it. He explored every corner of its code. He was fascinated by every detail. But as he studied, he also noticed limitations. Minix was restricted. You could look at it and learn from it, but you could not change it freely. You could not run it for real work. It was designed to be read, not to be used, and it only ran on certain hardware. It would not work well on the kind of computer that Linus had. And so, the idea that had perhaps been building in Linus's mind for years finally took a clear shape. What if he built his own operating system? Not a toy, not just for learning, a real one that could be used for real work, one that was free and open, one that could run on normal personal computers. It was a breathtaking idea. Building an operating system is one of the most complex and difficult things in all of software engineering. It is not like writing a simple program that does one task. It requires understanding the deepest layers of how a computer works. It requires getting hundreds of different components to work together perfectly. It requires months or years of intense effort. Most computer science students never even dream of attempting such a thing. Most professional programmers would laugh at the idea of one person doing it alone. But Linus was not most people. And he was not doing it to impress anyone. He was doing it because the problem excited him, because learning excited him, because building excited him, and because fundamentally he needed an operating system that worked the way he wanted, and none of the existing ones did. In 1991, Linus was 21 years old and still a university student. He was living in a small, simple apartment in Helsinki. The apartment was not elegant. The furniture was basic. The food was simple. The winters were cold and long. But the apartment had electricity and a computer, and that was all Linus needed. He had recently bought a new computer. It was an IBM compatible personal computer, a fairly standard machine for the time. It came with a Microsoft operating system. But Linus quickly found that the system was limiting. There were things he wanted to do that it would not allow. There were ways he wanted to work that it did not support. So he decided He was going to build something better. He started on the foundation. The most important part of any operating system is called the kernel. The kernel is the core. It is the part that manages the processor, the memory, and all the hardware connected to the computer. Everything else, every program, every application, every feature is built on top of the kernel. If the kernel is unstable, everything above it falls apart. If the kernel is solid, everything above it can thrive. Linus began writing his kernel, line by line, day after day, night after night. His routine was almost meditative. He would wake up, he would make coffee, he would sit at his desk, he would open his code, he would think about the problem he needed to solve that day. He would write, he would test, he would find errors, he would fix them, he would test again, he would write more. By the time he looked at the clock, it would be midnight. Sometimes later, he barely left the apartment. He did not go to parties. He did not watch much television. He did not spend his time the way most young men his age did. But he was not miserable. He was alive in the work. The code was his conversation, his puzzle, his art, his purpose. His mother would sometimes call. Linus, are you eating? She would ask with that particular tone that only mothers have. Yes, mother, he would say, though the truth was that he sometimes forgot to eat. Time moved differently when he was deep in a problem. An hour felt like 10 minutes. A day could pass without him noticing. There were breakthroughs, moments when a difficult piece of code finally worked and the screen displayed exactly the output he had hoped for. In those moments, Linus felt a pure and quiet joy, not excitement that he needed to share, not pride that he needed others to witness, just a deep personal satisfaction, the satisfaction of a craftsman who has done something right. And there were failures, dark nights when nothing worked, when the code he had been writing all day produced nothing but errors, when the solution he had thought was elegant turned out to be completely wrong, when he had to delete hours of work and start again from a different direction. In those moments, he would sit back and stare at the ceiling. He would breathe. He would think about the problem from a new angle. Sometimes he would sleep on it and wake up with an idea. Sometimes the solution came while he was doing something else entirely, washing dishes or taking a walk in the cold Helsinki air. This is how real creative work happens. Not in a straight line, not always forward, sometimes sideways, sometimes backward, but always eventually forward again. After months of this intense and solitary effort, Linus had something real. It was not finished. It was not polished. But it worked. He had written a kernel, a functioning, genuine operating system kernel that could run on his computer. And now the question was, what to do with it? He thought about this. He was not a naturally social person. He did not chase attention. But he also had a deep belief, developed through years of reading and thinking about computers, that software should be free and open, that the code, the instructions that make software work, should be something that anyone could read, learn from, and improve. And so he made a decision that would change history. He shared it. On August 25th, 1991, Linus posted a message on the internet. He used a discussion group called comp.uos.minix, which was an online space where people who were interested in the Minix operating system gathered to talk. It was a community of serious computer users and programmers. His message was careful and modest. He did not make big claims. He did not promise great things. He said something like this. He was working on a free operating system as a hobby. It was probably not going to be something big or professional, but he was curious what features people would want. He invited suggestions. He pressed the button to send the message, and he waited. He did not know what would happen. He had no expectations. Maybe a few people would reply, maybe nobody would. The internet in 1991 was small. The community of serious computer users was limited. He prepared himself for silence. But silence did not come. The responses started arriving. First a few, then more, then many more. People were interested, more than interested. They were excited. Some people had been wanting something exactly like this, an operating system that was free and open and modern, something that was not restricted by licenses or controlled by a company, something they could actually use and change and study. People asked detailed questions about the technical architecture. People tested the early versions and found bugs and reported them. People had ideas for improvements, and some people, incredibly, started contributing their own code. They wrote new parts themselves and sent them to Linus. Linus was both delighted and overwhelmed. He had expected a hobby project. He was getting a community. He named the new operating system Linux. It was simple. His name, Linus, combined with Unix, the famous operating system that had inspired him and many others. Linux, clean, easy to say, easy to remember. And he made a defining decision. He released Linux under a license that made it truly free. Not just free to use, but free to study, free to modify, free to distribute, free to build upon. This was called open source software. The source code, the actual instructions that make the software work, would be publicly available to everyone in the world. This was not a common idea at the time. The dominant technology companies, especially Microsoft, kept their code completely private. Their code was a secret. You could use their software, but you could never look inside it or change it. This kept power and control firmly in the hands of the companies. Linus believed in the opposite approach. He believed that when smart and dedicated people everywhere in the world can all look at the same code, all find the same bugs, all suggest the same improvements, the result will always be better than what any single company can produce alone. Transparency makes software stronger. Community makes software better. He was profoundly right. The Linux community grew. In the first year, it was small, dozens of contributors, then hundreds. They were students and professors and professional programmers. They came from Finland, from Germany, from the United States, from Australia, from Japan, different countries, different backgrounds, different languages. But they shared a common language in the code. They shared a common belief in free software. Linus became the central figure of the project. He was the gatekeeper. Every contribution, every new piece of code had to pass through him. He read it. He tested it. He approved or rejected it. He gave feedback that was direct and sometimes blunt. If the code was bad, he said so. If the approach was wrong, he explained why. He did not pretend that mediocre work was acceptable just to be polite. This created a culture of high standards. The Linux community was not always comfortable. It was demanding. It required the best work you could do. But it also rewarded that work with something valuable. A place in one of the most important software projects in the world. A contribution that would outlast you. A connection with some of the most talented programmers on the planet. While all of this was happening, Linus was still a student. He still attended lectures. He still wrote papers and took exams. He was living a double life in a sense. On the outside, he was a normal university student. On the inside, he was running a global software movement from his apartment. His professors were not always aware of what he was doing outside of class. Some of them probably would not have understood it even if they had known. What Linus was doing was something new. There was no class for it. There was no textbook that described exactly how to do what he was doing. He was inventing as he went, learning as he went, growing as he went. In 1994, Linus released version 1.0 of the Linux kernel. This was a milestone. It meant that the project had reached a point of stability and completeness. Version 1.0 was not perfect, no software ever is. But it was good, it was solid, it was something real. And the community celebrated. Linus graduated from the University of Helsinki around this same time. He had his degree in computer science. He had fulfilled the formal requirements of his education. But alongside those formal requirements, he had also built something that would prove to be far more significant than any grade or certificate. He needed a job. He was a young man with a degree, a passion, and a growing reputation in the technology world. He found work at a Finnish company called Transmeta. They were working on processor technology, which was interesting to Linus. He worked there while also continuing to develop Linux in his personal time. The two lives ran in parallel. During this period in the mid 1990s, something enormous was happening in the world. The internet was growing at a speed nobody had anticipated. More people were connecting, more businesses were going online, more information was being shared, more services were being provided through computers and networks, and all of those new internet services needed computers to run on. Not just personal computers, but servers. Powerful computers that could handle many requests at once. Computers that could run for months and years without stopping. Computers that needed to be stable and reliable and secure. Linux was built for exactly this. It was stable, it was reliable, it could handle enormous loads, it could run on many different types of hardware, it could be adapted and customized for specific purposes, and it was free. A company did not have to pay license fees to use it. They could take the code, modify it for their specific needs, and deploy it on as many machines as they wanted. Company after company started choosing Linux for their servers. Not small companies experimenting, big companies making serious decisions. Companies that needed their systems to work, no matter what, the internet was built on Linux. This is not a metaphor. When you visit a website, most of the time there is a Linux server somewhere responding to your request. When your email is delivered, it almost certainly passed through a Linux machine. When you make an online payment, the transaction is processed on Linux. When you stream music or video, the content comes from a Linux server. The foundations of the modern internet are made of Linux. And Linus, sitting in his apartment, reviewing code and responding to emails, had built those foundations. Then came a year that would prove to be another turning point. In 2005, Linus created something else that would become, in its own way, just as important as Linux itself. The problem was this. The Linux project by 2005 had thousands of contributors. It was an enormous, complex project with tens of millions of lines of code. Managing all the changes that thousands of people were making required a special tool, a system that could track every change, record who made it, remember the history, and allow developers to work simultaneously without destroying each other's work. The existing tools for this were slow and frustrating. They required a central server that every developer had to connect to. If the connection was slow, everything was slow. If the server had a problem, everything stopped. Linus found these tools infuriating. They did not match the way he thought and worked, so he decided to build a new one. He worked on it intensely for about 10 days. 10 days. He focused completely on the problem. He thought about what the ideal tool would look like, what properties it needed to have. He designed it carefully and then built it quickly. At the end of those 10 days, he had a working version of something new. He called it Git. Git is a distributed version control system. This means that instead of requiring one central server, every developer who uses Git has a complete copy of the entire history of the project on their own computer. Everyone can work independently. Everyone can see the full history. Everyone can create branches of development and merge them together. Everyone can work offline and synchronize later. It sounds technical, but the effect was revolutionary. Git made it possible for large numbers of programmers to collaborate on the same project smoothly, efficiently, and reliably. It made the history of every change permanent and accessible. It made it easy to experiment with new ideas without risking the main project. Today, Git is used by virtually every software developer in the world. It is the universal standard. Large companies and small startups all use Git. Universities teach it in their computer science courses. Every professional programmer needs to know Git. The website GitHub, which is built on top of Git, hosts millions of software projects from around the world and is used by more than 100 million developers. All of this came from 10 days of focused, intense work by one person who was simply frustrated with the existing tools. Linus did not spend months planning Git. He did not form a committee. He did not do market research. He identified a problem, thought about the solution, and built it. That is who he is. As the 2000s progressed, the Linux world and the wider technology world continued to change rapidly. A major development came in 2008 when Google released a new mobile operating system. They called it Android. Android was designed to run on smartphones, and at the very heart of Android, powering everything, was the Linux kernel, the same kernel that Linus had started writing in his tiny Helsinki apartment in 1991, the same code that he had shared with the world for free. Now it was running on smartphones around the world, first in the millions, then in the hundreds of millions, then in the billions. Today, Android runs on more than 3 billion devices worldwide. When someone in Brazil checks their messages, they may be using Linux. When a student in India watches a video, they may be using Linux. When a grandmother in Japan takes a photo with her phone, she may be using Linux. When a child in Nigeria plays a game, he may be using Linux. The quiet boy from Finland is everywhere. But it is not just phones. Linux runs the majority of the world's web servers. It runs almost all of the cloud computing infrastructure. When you use Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, you are almost certainly using virtual machines that run on Linux. The cloud that the modern world depends on is a Linux cloud. Linux runs the supercomputers that scientists use to study the human genome, to simulate climate patterns, to model the physics of the universe, to search for new medicines. In fact, as of recent years, every single one of the world's top 500 supercomputers runs Linux. Every one, Linux runs NASA systems. It runs the computers at the International Space Station. It runs the ground control systems for satellites. When humanity sent a rover to Mars and it successfully landed and began exploring the red planet, the systems that processed the data and supported that mission ran on Linux. When scientists at CERN in Switzerland used their enormous particle accelerator to discover the Higgs boson, a fundamental particle of the universe, the data processing for that experiment ran on Linux systems. When hospitals around the world use computer systems to manage patient records, to process medical images, to control complex medical equipment, much of that technology runs on Linux. The digital world that billions of people live in every day is built on a foundation that Linus Torvalds built for free because he was curious about computers and wanted something that worked the way he wanted it to work. Now let us talk about Linus, the person, more fully. Because the technology is extraordinary, but the human story is just as important. Linus moved to the United States in the late 1990s. He went to work for an organization that supported the development of Linux. His job, paid for by the technology industry, was simply to continue doing what he had always done, to develop and guide the Linux kernel. For the first time in his life, the hobby and the job were the same thing. He settled in Oregon, in the northwest of the United States. He lived in a house in a quiet neighborhood. He had a home office where he worked. His life looked simple from the outside. He was not living in a mansion. He was not driving expensive cars. He was not attending glamorous events. He was working at his computer the same way he always had, and Linus had a family now. This was perhaps the biggest surprise in his story for those who had only known him through his technical work. The shy, introverted, computer obsessed programmer had fallen in love. Her name was Tove Moni. She was a Finnish woman. She was also a national karate champion. She was strong and confident and direct, in some ways, a perfect complement to Linus. They had met in Finland and married, and together they had three daughters. Their names were Patricia, Daniela, and Celeste. Being a father changed Linus in ways that code never could. He could be direct and critical about software. About people he loved, he was tender and protective. He tried to be present for his daughters. He tried to be at their school events, their activities, their ordinary moments. He did not always succeed. The work pulled at him, as work always had. But he was aware of it. Tove was the anchor of the family. She understood Linus deeply. She accepted his need for long hours alone with his work. She also pushed back when he needed pushing. She kept the family grounded. She made the house a home. Linus was the first to say that without her, his personal life would have been chaotic. The daughters grew up in a house where computers were as natural as furniture. But Linus did not push them toward technology. He let them find their own paths. He wanted them to have the freedom that his grandfather Leo had given him. The freedom to discover what excited them and to pursue it with full energy. At work, Linus continued to guide Linux with remarkable consistency. Year after year, he reviewed code, made decisions, corresponded with developers, and maintained the standards that he had established from the beginning. The project grew larger every year. The number of contributors grew into the thousands. The amount of code grew into the tens of millions of lines. And through it all, Linus remained the steady hand at the center. He was not always easy to work with. He was direct in a way that some found uncomfortable. He was not interested in politics or diplomacy. He was interested in getting things right. If code was bad, he said it was bad. If a decision was wrong, he said it was wrong. He did not soften his words to protect feelings. For some, this was refreshing. They appreciated knowing exactly where they stood. They appreciated that quality was taken seriously. They appreciated that in the Linux community, what mattered was the work itself, not who you knew or how well you could sell your ideas. But for others, especially people who were new to open source development, or people who came from cultures where direct criticism was considered rude, the environment could feel harsh. The words could sting. The tone could discourage. This became a significant conversation in the technology world. As Linux grew and the community expanded to include millions of people of different backgrounds, the culture of the project came under scrutiny. People asked whether a culture of harsh criticism was truly necessary for technical excellence. They asked whether there were talented people who were staying away because the environment felt unwelcoming. In 2018, these conversations reached a critical point. Linus made a decision that surprised many people. He stepped back from his role temporarily, and he made a public statement that was, for him, extraordinary. He admitted that he had not always been empathetic. He admitted that his behavior had sometimes hurt people who did not deserve to be hurt. He said he was going to seek advice and try to do better. This was remarkable. Here was a man who had built one of the greatest technical achievements in history, standing up and saying, I got something wrong. I need to grow. Many people had seen this kind of honesty from ordinary individuals learning from their mistakes. Fewer people had seen it from someone in Linus's position. People in positions of power rarely admit fault so directly, but Linus did. Because, as he himself might say, pretending you are right when you are wrong is simply dishonest. And dishonesty, to Linus, was one of the worst things you could be. He returned to his work. He tried to apply what he had learned. He was never going to become someone who was artificially warm or who avoided difficult truths to keep the peace. That would not have been authentic. But he could be more mindful. He could deliver hard truths without unnecessary harshness. He could remember that behind every line of code was a human being who had put effort into it and cared about the result. The Linux community continued, it adapted, it grew, and the kernel kept improving. Let us think for a moment about what Linus represents, not just as a programmer, not just as a historical figure, but as a human being and as a lesson. He grew up feeling different. He was the boy who did not quite fit in. He found human relationships complicated while machines were simple. He found more joy in solving problems than in small talk. He was the kind of person who, in many societies, gets overlooked or dismissed. The quiet one, the strange one, the one who spends too much time alone. But Linus leaned into who he was. He did not try to become someone different to please others. He did not pretend to enjoy things he did not enjoy. He did not force himself to be social in ways that felt unnatural. He accepted himself and then went to work on developing his genuine strengths as far as they could go. This is one of the deepest lessons in his story. Knowing yourself, understanding what you truly love, and then following that with complete commitment, regardless of whether others understand or approve. The world needed Linus to be Linus, not a more social version of himself, not a version of himself that spent less time at the computer. The version that sat alone in a cold apartment in Helsinki and built an operating system because he wanted one. That version, exactly that one. What does Linux mean for the future? The answer is that it will grow even more important as the world becomes more digital, as artificial intelligence develops, as the Internet of Things connects more devices, as computing becomes woven even more deeply into medicine and science, and transportation and communication. Linux will be underneath more and more of it. Linux is already in your home. It may be in your television, your router, your smart speakers, your home assistant. It is almost certainly in the data centers that power the services you use every day. It will be in the smart infrastructure of future cities, in autonomous vehicles, in the systems that manage energy grids and water supply, in the medical devices that monitor and treat the human body. Linus will not build all of that. No one person could. But the foundation he built, freely given to the world, will be there underneath it all. And that brings us to the deepest truth of this story. When Linus posted his message to the internet in August 1991, he called his project a hobby. He said it would not be big. He did not know what would happen. He was a young man in an apartment, sharing something he had built, asking if anyone was interested. He was interested in being useful. He was interested in making something work well. He was interested in solving problems that interested him. He was not interested in being famous. He was not interested in becoming a symbol. And yet, because he built something real and good and shared it honestly, he became one of the most impactful figures in the history of human technology. This is one of the beautiful ironies of greatness. The people who chase fame rarely find lasting greatness. The people who chase quality and honesty and genuine usefulness often find, without looking for it, that they have changed the world. Linus did not set out to be a hero. He set out to have a good operating system. The hero part was a side effect of doing the real work. Now, let us speak directly to you, the person listening to this story. Maybe you are studying English and this story is helping you learn. Maybe you are interested in technology and Linus's story inspires you. Maybe you are someone who feels different, someone who does not quite fit into the groups around you, someone who wonders if your particular way of seeing the world will ever be useful. Linus felt all of that, the difference, the not quite fitting in, the uncertainty about whether his particular way of thinking mattered. And his answer to those feelings was the same answer every day. Sit down, learn something, build something, share it, do the work. He did not wait until he felt ready. He started when he was ready enough, which is the only kind of ready that exists. He did not wait for permission from teachers or companies or society. He gave himself permission by doing the work. He did not wait for the perfect moment or the perfect resources. He used what he had: a computer, electricity, knowledge, and time, all of which he had in abundance because he had spent years building them. What do you have in abundance? What do you love doing so much that you forget to eat while you are doing it? What problem would you spend a year solving? Not because someone was paying you, but because the problem itself was fascinating? Find that thing. Start there. Work hard. Share what you learn. Help others. Keep going. You may not change the world, but you will change your world. And sometimes, when you change your world with enough honesty and quality and generosity, it turns out that you have changed everyone's world too. This has been the story of Linus Torvalds, a boy born in Finland in the middle of winter, who sat in the glow of a computer screen and typed his way into history, who gave the world something extraordinary and asked for nothing in return except the freedom to keep building, who built the foundation that the modern world stands on, who proved that one quiet, stubborn, brilliant person with a good idea and the courage to share it can change everything. The internet runs on Linux, the cloud runs on Linux, your phone probably runs on Linux, space missions run on Linux, scientific discovery runs on Linux, the future will run on Linux. And Linux runs on the heart of a boy from Helsinki who just loved computers. Thank you for listening to this story. If you are learning English, you have just read over 10,000 words of clear, natural English. Well done, that is something to be proud of. If you are working on a dream of your own, let Linus inspire you. Start where you are. Work with what you have. Share what you build and keep going. This has been English Story Orbit. Keep learning, keep building, and never be afraid to begin. Moral of the story: you do not need to be the loudest person in the room to change the world. You need curiosity, patience, honesty, a deep love for what you do, and the courage to share your work with others. Start small, stay consistent, welcome help from others, maintain high standards, and never stop learning. True greatness is not something you chase, It is something you build quietly, one honest effort at a time. Wait. Before we close, let us go back to some of the moments in this story that deserve more time. Because the big moments of history are built from small, quiet moments. And those small moments are where real lessons live. Let us go back to the apartment in Helsinki. Picture it more carefully. The year is 1991. The month is somewhere between spring and summer. Linus is 21. He wakes up in the morning, and the first thing on his mind is a problem he was working on the night before. Not breakfast, not what he will wear. The problem. He has been trying to get his kernel to communicate with the disk drive correctly. The kernel needs to read and write data to the disk. This sounds simple, but it is not simple at all. The disk drive is a physical device. It has its own language, its own timing, its own quirks. To communicate with it, you need to write code that speaks the disk's language perfectly. One error and the data gets corrupted. One mistake and the system crashes. Linus had been working on this for days. He had tried several approaches. Each one had problems. He had gone to sleep frustrated. The kind of frustration that sits in your chest and will not let you fully rest. But in the morning, something had shifted. As sometimes happens with very hard problems, sleeping on it had done something. The mind, released from the pressure of conscious effort, had continued working quietly in the background. And now, in the pale morning light of Helsinki, Linus had an idea. He did not eat breakfast. He sat down at the computer. He opened the code. He began to type. For 3 hours, he worked without stopping. His coffee went cold. The morning turned into noon. And then, at some point in the early afternoon, he ran the code. The disk drive responded correctly. The data was read. The data was written. No crash, no error. He sat back in his chair. He was alone in the apartment. There was no one to celebrate with, no one to share the moment. Just Linus and the screen and the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. He took a sip of his cold coffee, made a face at the temperature, got up and made fresh coffee, and then sat back down and started on the next problem. This is what most people do not see when they look at a great achievement. They see the result. They see the finished software, the millions of users, the changed world. They do not see the cold coffee. They do not see the frustration of the previous nights. They do not see the 3 hours alone in an apartment, typing in silence, solving one small piece of an enormous puzzle. But it is those moments, those quiet and solitary moments of effort that make the great achievement possible. The grand outcome is just the sum of thousands of small efforts, each one invisible, each one important. Linus had thousands of those moments, and he had them alone in a cold apartment with no guarantee that any of it would matter. This is worth sitting with. When you are working on something that is hard and slow and uncertain, when you are in the middle of the process and cannot see the end, when you wonder if the effort is worth it, remember the cold coffee in Helsinki. The result does not appear all at once. It appears one small piece at a time, in quiet moments of focused effort. Now let us think about the people around Linus, because no person succeeds entirely alone, even when they look like they do. We have talked about his grandfather Leo, but there were others. When Linus posted his message to the internet in 1991, some people responded with genuine helpfulness. They were strangers. They had no obligation to help, but they were part of a community of people who believed in free software and in sharing knowledge. And they showed up. One of those early contributors was a programmer in England. He started contributing code to Linux in the early days and became one of the most important Linux developers over the years. He represented the kind of person who made Linux possible, a skilled professional who gave time and energy to a project he believed in without payment, simply because it mattered. There were hundreds of others like him, people who gave their time and expertise freely, people who debugged problems at midnight because they found the problem interesting, people who wrote documentation so that other people could understand the code, people who translated the software into different languages so that more people could use it, people who tested new versions and carefully reported what broke and how. Linus was at the center. But without those people, there was no center to be at. Linux is his creation and also the world's creation. It belongs to both. This is one of the things that makes it unique in the history of technology. In a sense, Linus did not just build software, he built a community, a global community of people who shared a belief, the belief that software should be free, the belief that openness makes things better, the belief that collaboration across borders and backgrounds produces results that no single group can match. This community is called the open source community, and it has changed far more than just Linux. The philosophy of open source has spread to other areas. It has influenced the way scientists share research data. It has influenced the way educators share teaching materials. It has influenced how governments think about making public information accessible. The idea that open and shared is often better than closed and proprietary is now a mainstream belief in technology, and Linus and the Linux community helped put it there. Let us also think about something surprising. Linus was not the first person to try to build a free operating system. There was already a project called GNU, started years before Linux. The GNU project had built many important tools, but by 1991, it still did not have a working kernel. Linus built a working kernel in less than a year. The combination of the GNU tools and the Linux kernel created what millions of people now use. Two complementary efforts, one by a movement and one by a lone student, came together to create something greater than either could have produced alone. This is another lesson. Your work does not exist in isolation. It connects to other work. It builds on other work. The things you make may become part of something much larger than what you intended. Being aware of this, being humble about this, is part of being a thoughtful creator. Linus always acknowledged how much Linux depended on the work of others. This honesty about shared credit helped build trust, and trust helped build the community. Now let us look at Linux through an economic lens. The Linux kernel, freely given to the world, has generated enormous economic value. Estimates suggest that if someone tried to rebuild the Linux kernel today from scratch, it would cost many billions of dollars. Companies that use Linux have saved vast amounts of money. They have not had to pay license fees. They have not had to wait for a single company to update the software. They have taken the code and adapted it to their own needs. This flexibility has been worth enormous amounts to the global economy. But Linus himself did not become fabulously wealthy from this. He chose to give his work away. He lived comfortably, yes, but his primary motivation was never money. And this freed him to make decisions based on what he believed was right rather than what was most profitable. When you are not primarily motivated by money, you have a kind of freedom that money itself cannot buy. You can choose quality over profit. You can choose honesty over popularity. You can choose long-term value over short-term gain. This was the condition that allowed Linux to become what it became. If Linus had been primarily motivated by profit, he likely would have built something different, something smaller, something that would have disappeared by now. Instead, he built something free, and it became the foundation of the world. Now consider something remarkable about the dimension of time. Linus started working on Linux in 1991. That is more than 30 years ago. In technology, 30 years is a very long time. Companies that were giants in 1991 have disappeared. Technologies that seemed permanent have become obsolete. The landscape of computing has changed beyond recognition. And yet Linux is still here, not just surviving, thriving, growing, becoming more important every year. How is this possible? Partly it is technical. Linux was designed well from the beginning. The fundamental architecture was sound. The decisions Linus made about structure were good decisions that proved adaptable over time. But it is also about the community. Because Linux is not controlled by any single company, it does not die when that company changes direction or goes bankrupt. It does not depend on any single person's continued interest. It belongs to everyone, and because it belongs to everyone, it adapts. As technology changes, the community adapts Linux with it. As new hardware appears, the community adds support. As new uses emerge, the community extends the kernel to handle them. Open source is not just a philosophy, it is also a survival strategy. Things that are open and shared and owned by communities are more resilient than things that are closed and controlled. Linux will almost certainly outlast every proprietary operating system that exists today, not because it is perfect, but because it belongs to everyone. Linus understood this intuitively. He just felt that open was right, that sharing was right. He acted on that feeling, and the feeling turned out to be correct in ways that went far beyond what he could have imagined. He has received recognition over the years. He has won major awards. He has been acknowledged by universities, governments, and technology organizations around the world. He has honorary doctorates from respected institutions. He has been named among the most important people in computing history. He accepts these recognitions politely. He does not chase them. He is not a person who needs external validation. His validation comes from the work itself, from the code, from the technical decisions he makes each day, from the quiet satisfaction of a well solved problem. This is who Linus Torvalds is at his core, a craftsman, a person who cares deeply about doing the work right, a person who finds more satisfaction in elegant code than in awards or attention, a person who built one of the most important things in computing history because he genuinely loved the problem. And now, one final reflection. We started this story in a cold room in Finland, a boy and a screen and silence. We have traveled a long road from that room to the present day, from Helsinki to Oregon, from a hobby project to the foundation of the internet, from one young man's curiosity to billions of devices around the world. But in an important sense, the story has not changed. The same values that were present in that cold room in 1991 are present in Linus's work today. Honesty, quality, sharing, community, curiosity, hard work, the joy of a problem solved. These are not complicated values. They are not secret. They are not advanced. They are simple and ancient and true. They are the same values that have driven every genuine achievement in human history. Work hard, do it right, share what you learn, help others, keep going. The scale changes, the technology changes, the world changes. But the values do not change. The values are the foundation. And foundations, when they are built right, last Linus Torvalds built a great foundation. And on that foundation, the world has built extraordinary things. Perhaps you are someone who has an idea right now. Perhaps it is small. Perhaps it is unfinished. Perhaps you are afraid that it is not good enough to share, not complete enough to show, not ready enough to present. Linus had all of those feelings. Every creator does, but he posted it anyway. The message he sent in 1991 said it was a hobby, said it would not be big, said it was probably not very good. But he sent it, he shared it, he let the world see it. And the world responded. Your idea does not have to be perfect to be shared. It just has to be honest. It just has to be real. It just has to come from genuine curiosity and genuine effort. That is enough to start. That is enough to grow. Start where you are. Use what you have. Build something. Share it. Accept help when it comes. Give help when you can. Keep your standards high. Learn from your mistakes without being destroyed by them. And never, ever stop. This is the story of Linus Torvalds, a quiet boy from a cold city who sat at a screen and typed his way into history, who gave the world something extraordinary and asked for nothing in return, who built the foundation that the modern world stands on. The internet runs on his work. The cloud runs on his work. Billions of phones run on his work. Space missions run on his work. Scientific discovery runs on his work. And his work runs on the simple, honest, stubborn love of a boy who just wanted a good operating system. Whatever you are building, build it with that same love, with that same honesty, with that same stubborn dedication to getting it right. The world is waiting. This has been a story from English Story Orbit. Keep learning, keep building, and never be afraid to begin.